Εν τη γεννήση την παρθενίανε φύλαξας, εν τη κοιμήση των κόσμων ου κατέλειπες Θεοτόκε, μετέστης προς την ζωήν μητήρ υπάρχουσα.
If we can all please rise to do a quick prayer. Let us pray to the Lord. Lord, have mercy. Out of the night our spirit awakes at dawn unto you, our God. For your commandments are a light. Teach us your righteousness, your commandments, and your statutes, O God. Enlighten the eyes of our understanding, lest at any time we sleep unto death and sins. Dispel all darkness from our hearts. Graciously give unto us the Son of righteousness, and by your Holy Spirit preserve our life unassailed. Guide our steps into the way of peace. Grant us to behold the dawn and the day with joy, that we may raise our morning prayers to you. For yours is the might, and yours is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and ever, into the ages of ages. Please be seated. Before we start on our theme for today, the second Adult Education Program session, we have a leftover question from last time. The question that I received was the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. What was he working off of? What liturgy was he basing his own liturgy off of? So I did some research. St. Basil's liturgy was written just before the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. So St. John had St. Basil's liturgy to work off of, which is why they're very similar. Now, what was St. Basil's liturgy based off of? There's many ancient texts that he draws from. But the most important one and significant one is the liturgy that is written by St. Justin Martyr, or that's included, not written by, but included by St. Justin Martyr, who goes all the way back to the 1st century AD. In some of his writings that he left for us, there is a skeleton, basically a skeleton of the Divine Liturgy as we see it today, that St. Basil and St. John Chrysostom both used as their basis and their skeleton for the Divine Liturgies that we have today. So that was what I was able to find, just to finish off that last question that we had from our last session. So if we were going to do a quick recap for all those of you that were here for session 1, what would kind of have been basically the main point I was trying to make, that we were trying to make really, from the first session. Those of you that were, I know it was about a month ago now, maybe even it was more than a month ago, but for those of you that were here, anything that you can remember that stuck out to you about the last time that we met? Anything at all? If you had to pick just one, what would it be? You guys being shy today? Yes. So the main point that we discussed about, was the Divine Liturgy as heaven on earth, right? We talked about heaven on earth. And how when we step into our churches, we're stepping into heaven itself, particularly in the Divine Liturgy, especially in the Divine Liturgy. We told some nice stories. And then we talked about how when we're in church, we're surrounded by the saints, the angels, by even the departed loved ones that we have lost in this life, and then finally by the Theotokos and by even Christ himself, who really is the one who presides over the liturgy. He's really the one that performs the liturgy, as the priest really doesn't have any powers besides what he has through Christ himself. So that was kind of what we talked about last week. That was the main gist of it. Obviously, we talked a lot deeper about it, but those were the main points. So today we're going to build on that theme, heaven on earth, but instead of taking a theoretical approach, which was kind of what we did last time, a theological approach, we're going to see how this theology of ours, of the heaven on earth, is expressed in our worship services, in our divine worship, especially the liturgy. The two specific things I want to talk to you guys about today are the proskomidie service, which is the preparation of the holy gifts, and then we'll talk a little bit at the end about church architecture, because I believe that's a very important part of our churches that we often don't think about, but really it expresses that theology that I'm talking about. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. I have some handouts for you. Don't worry, it's not homework. Just some informational things. You can pass those back. Pass those back. Make sure everybody gets one. Might have to share. I think we'll have enough though. Do we need more in the back? Need some more? I think we got that side covered. Okay, we're good? All right. So the proskomidi service, or the service of the preparation, is done by the priest even before the liturgy starts. It's done usually during the Orthros portion, the morning prayers, the morning service. And it's basically the service where the priest takes the prosphoro, takes the bread, which I have here, and I brought one here. He takes the prosphoro, and he cuts it. He cuts it into all of the pieces that he's going to need in order to perform the divine liturgy. So this bread, the prosphoro, becomes prepared to become the body and blood of Christ through this service. And it really illustrates perfectly this theme that we're talking about of heaven on earth and being surrounded by the saints and the angels and even Christ himself. So the prosphoron, as we know, if you go to the prosphoron side of your handout, is the holy bread. The word prosphoro, of course, in Greek means what? An offering, yeah. It's a bread that we usually make at home, that we seal with the seal that you see in front of you, and then we offer it to the church. We offer it to Christ. And it's part of our synergy with Christ. If you think about it, really, there's like the whole liturgy is really a synergy. How do we make the bread? Well, we have to have wheat first. The wheat comes from God. Man didn't create wheat out of nothing. Man he received grain and wheat and all those things from God himself. We receive that gift, we transform it, we make it into bread, and we give it back to the church. And God takes that gift of ours and transforms it again and makes it into his body and blood and gives it to us, transforming us. And then we, of course, have to transform ourselves and give our lives back to Christ. So this is the synergy of the divine liturgy. So the prosphoro is a very special bread we only use during the divine liturgy. It's made with a special seal that has a few different elements. So that's this side of the sheet right here. And I highlighted the different elements that I'm going to be talking about. So in the center square, the yellow square that I have there, is we call it the amno. Amno in Greek means what? Ancient Greek. Amnos. Lamb. It means a lamb, okay? Now, of course, it's not a real lamb, like we eat on Pascha, but we call it the lamb. Why do we call it the lamb? Well, the prophet Isaiah, in his prophecies, refers to the Messiah as the lamb that will one day be led to the slaughter, that will remain speechless in front of his executors, and that will be slain for the sins of the people. And of course, Christ fulfills these words through his crucifixion. You can see in this square that it's marked with the symbol of Christ, the IC Nika, the Jesus Christos Nika, which is the symbol, of course, of the Christian faith that Constantine saw, St. Constantine, before the great battle when he became the emperor of the Roman Empire in Constantinople. So this centerpiece here, when it's cut out, will become the body of Christ, the centerpiece. That's why it's called the Amnon, because it will eventually become Christ, who, as we said, is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Now, we see, if you look really closely, there's above and below that yellow square, there's two more squares with the Jesus Christos Nika. Now, those squares, I tried very diligently to figure out exactly what purpose those are, because during the liturgy on Sunday, we don't use those squares. My guess is, this is my educated guess, is that in areas where prosphora are few and far between, where a priest does not have, like we do here, 20 prosphora, 10 in the freezer, they don't have that. Maybe they have one prosphora for a whole week. During Lent, they're able to prepare the pre-sanctified gifts using these other squares on the prosphora, because when we prepare the pre-sanctified here, we use two separate loaves, and we cut the amnos out of both of them. But if you only have one, you would still be able to prepare the pre-sanctified gifts using these extra squares that are present on the prosphora. Now, if we turn our attention to the blue triangle on your sheet, there's a triangle here, and there's a symbol on it, there's markings on it, and it looks kind of like letters. Can we discern what letters we see there? It's two Greek letters. It's actually not an alpha. It's a good guess. It kind of looks like an alpha. There's the symbol on the top is a theta. You can see if you look here, it comes down, it makes like a diamond, and then there's a line across the middle. That's a theta. And underneath the theta, if you look, there's a mi, there's an M. Okay? Those are the letters for the Virgin Mary. And the mi theta is mitir theu. Yeah. Mitir theu. So this triangle represents the Theotokos. And it's marked, like I said, with the mi and the theta. Now we have on the right side, the red triangles here, we have how many? We have 9 triangles, and they're smaller. They're smaller than the Panagia's triangles, much smaller. These triangles represent the order of the saints, the nine orders of the saints that we commemorate at every liturgy. These orders are, the angels are the first one, then we go down the prophets, the apostles, the hierarchs, the martyrs, the ascetics, the unmercenaries, meaning the healers, St. Cosmas and Damianos and saints like that. Then the 8th one is the saint of the day, the saint of the day. And then the final one is the saint, whoever's liturgy we're doing that day. St. John Chrysostom, St. Basil, or St. Gregory the Dialogist for the pre-sanctified gifts. So these 9 triangles here represent the 9 orders of the saints. So as the priest prepares the gifts to be used, he reads the following prayers. Excuse me, give me 1 second. Okay, he reads in Greek, Etimazu Bethlehem, make ready, O Bethlehem, for Eden has opened for all. Prepare, O Ephrathah, for the tree of life has blossomed forth in the cave from the Virgin. For her womb did appear as a spiritual paradise in which is planted the divine plant, whereof eating we shall live and not die as Adam. Christ shall be born, raising the image that fell of old. And then the next prayer is, you have redeemed us from the curse of the law. By your precious blood nailed to the cross and pierced by the spear, you have poured forth immortality upon mankind, O our Savior. Glory to you. So these prayers kind of show us that we're preparing the gifts that are going to be for our salvation. That they're going to be for us our salvation and our everlasting life. So those are the first prayers of the proskomidi. And then the priest begins to cut. As he cuts out the amno is the first piece that gets cut out, the yellow square. He cuts along the left side, saying, as a sheep led to the slaughter. Now these are it's quoting the words of Isaiah the prophet. Okay? As a sheep led to the slaughter. And he begins to cut it out. Notice how the prayers are about lambs. They're about sheeps. And then as he cuts along the right side, he says, and as a blameless lamb before its shearer is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. Meaning, as a blameless lamb that, as it's being sheared, the wool is being cut off, it does not speak to the shearer, it does not open his mouth. And in the Bible, we hear that Christ, in Pilate's court, did not respond to his questions. He was silent in the face of the accusations. Cutting across the top, he says, in his humiliation, justice was denied him. And along the bottom, he says, who can describe his generation? So now at this point, the priest has cut out the 4 sides, okay, and it's ready to be removed and lifted out of the prosphoro. And then he says, for his life is taken up from the earth. So the amnon now is taken up out of the prosphoro and is cut on the bottom. We cut the crust off of the bottom because it would be too difficult to cut through. And then we cross it. We cut a cross into the bottom of it so that we can break it later on. And it's placed on the center of the discarion. The discarion, I have a little diagram on the other side here. And this is the placement of the gifts on the discarion. The discarion, the paten, is this. I have these up here so we can see them a little bit later. This is the discarion. These are where the gifts are placed during the liturgy, and then they're consecrated on these gifts as well. So it's placed in the center, as you can see on the diagram. And this represents Christ. Christ, of course, is the largest piece. He's in the middle because he is the center of everything that we do. And he is the center of our salvation. So, after this piece is cut and placed, the priest fills the chalice, reading more prayers with wine and water. And then he begins to cut out the other pieces. For the Theotokos, he says, in honor and memory of our most blessed and glorious Lady, the Theotokos, and ever Virgin Mary, through whose intercessions do you accept, O Lord, this sacrifice upon your most heavenly and ideal altar. And as he places this piece on the discarion, to the left of the amno, he says, the queen stood at your right hand, clothed in a robe of gold adorned in varied colors. So this is he says that as he places the piece of the Theotokos here, okay, on the discarion. So now we have Christ in the center, and on the side of Christ we have the Theotokos. Kind of like if we see our iconostasis, we have Christ and we have the Panagia. They're always next to each other. Then very carefully, because the pieces are much smaller, he begins to cut out for each saint. And there's prayers for each order of the saints. So like I said, the angels, the prophets, the apostles, all the saints, one by one, he cuts out these little triangles and he places them on the other side of the Yamno, of the Lamb. And they're placed on the Discarion. So as the prayers of preparation are being completed, the Discarion is being filled. It's being filled so far with Christ, with the Theotokos, and with all of the saints. Now the interesting thing is what happens next in terms of our theme. Once all of these things are cut and placed onto the Discarion, the priest then commemorates all of the souls of the living. So the people in his church, the people in his family, anyone that is sick, anyone that needs special prayers, he commemorates them. And he takes a small piece, I'll show you the one I used today. He takes a small piece of the prosphoro, and underneath he begins to cut little crumbs out of it. Okay? And he cuts the crumbs. One direction, the up and down direction, is for the living, and those go on the Discarion. And the side-to-side direction, the horizontal line, is for the dead. And so you make a little cross on the bottom of it. And so these are also placed on the Discarion, underneath, which you can see here on the bottom. So now what do we have? What are we looking at here? We have Christ in the center, surrounded by the Theotokos, the angels and the saints, the living and the dead, which is exactly what we talked about last week as the image of the divine liturgy. Not the image, but the reality of the divine liturgy. That when we're in church, we're all together with Christ, with the Theotokos, with the saints, with all of the departed, and with our own people that are living on this earth. And so the proskomidi fulfills this image of the church, the fullness of the church, and of heaven itself. Later in the service, as these gifts have been presented, they've been brought out during the great entrance, the priest lifts them up. And remember last month we talked about how we are lifted into heaven itself. Okay? Our gifts are lifted into heaven and are offered at the altar table of Christ in heaven. So our gifts, our church basically, is on this Discarion, the representation of our church, and it's lifted by the priest physically, and at that point the gifts are consecrated. Christ and the Holy Spirit take those gifts up into heaven, and they become the body and blood of Christ. So the Amno becomes the body and blood of Christ, and we are all then in the presence of Christ, both mystically and in terms of the proskomidi as well. So this is that was the proskomidi service. I thought it's a service that not a lot of people get to see, because it's done in the altar behind the closed screen. Usually the priest is here. Usually when I do it here, I'm by myself. So nobody really sees me do it except for maybe Giriani, who's here he's very early in the morning. So maybe he will be here for part of it. But no one really sees this service done. And it's really a beautiful symbolism of the fullness of the church and what we're doing here. We're uniting ourselves with Christ. We're uniting ourselves with our fellow people, with the Theotokos, with the saints, and with all of those who have departed and all of those who are living. So this was the first thing I wanted to touch on today, the first expression. And we'll see all the tools that we use during the liturgy. You'll have a chance to see at the end, so you'll be able to see a little more closely what I'm talking about with some of these items as well. Now, I need to get the projector set up for the second portion of my talk today. So give me 1 second here. Yes. Are there any questions about the proskomidi service? Hold on, John. Let me give you my microphone.
You said on the bottom cut,
Yes.
who can describe their generation? Can you
Yes,
elaborate on
who can
that?
describe his generation, meaning who can explain how Christ became a man, basically, and and why he came to earth for us to be sacrificed as a lamb. So, yes.
You said during the proskomidi, the priest puts the wine and the water in the
Yes.
chalice,
Mm-hmm.
as well as afterwards, later in the liturgy, he puts the warm water.
Yes. The question, in case you didn't hear, was the proskomidi, the priest places the wine and the water in the chalice, which is true. He does place the wine and the water in the chalice, and later on he puts hot water in the chalice as well. The reason for that is the priest reads the prayer during the proskomidie and says, by the soldier was Christ pierced with the spear, and out of his side came blood and water. So in the chalice, there's always wine and water. It's not just wine, and we would never use just water. Actually, that was one of the ancient heresies, was there were churches that would only use water for Holy Communion and would not use wine. But this was a false teaching that the church was able to overcome. So even from the beginning, the chalice always has the blood, the wine and the water to show Christ's two natures. Both the wine being the blood, the humanity, and the water being the purity of his divinity. Later on, the hot water is added as a symbol of the fervor of the saints, of the life in Christ, the zeal that we must have for Christ, as well as to make the communion easier to consume, more pleasant for the priest to consume later on in the service. So that's why the hot water is also used practically and symbolically. Yes, is there another question? Yes, okay, so what we do, if we don't need, sorry, give us 1 second. If there's only one, if the prosphoro is only being used for one service, if the prosphoro is only being used for one service, the bottom square, this piece is removed prior to the amno to get it out of the way, to make it easy for the priest to take the amno out. At that point, he cuts this piece in half. Okay, that's this that I showed you. You can see on the top is the Jesus Christos Nika. So that's that bottom square. I cut it in half, as you can see. It's not a full square. And I spread it out from the bottom. It's little crumbs. You make little crumbs from the bottom. As you say each name, you make a crumb, basically. So that's where those pieces come from, and then they are placed on the discarion as well. In some traditions, they're cut out of the side of the prosphoro. But the Greek tradition does not do that. It would be very difficult to perform the service that way. Yes?
You say the name.
Yes.
What names do you say during that?
So the priest will say the names from his family usually first. If he has an immediate, like his own family, presbyteras, kids, and then he'll say his own personal family names, and then any names of his parishioners that are that he commemorates, that he's able to commemorate. Obviously, in a small church, you could even commemorate every parishioner. In large churches such as ours, we don't commemorate all of them. Down here, for example, I commemorate all the Sunday school children. I read all the names of the Sunday school kids, and they're for their families, and then any names that are given to the priest. Some families, when they bring in prosphora, will give names. So they will give names to be read during the proskomidie service. So this is for the names that are read at that time. So, and it's a wonderful thing to do. If you ever bring a prosphora, or even if you just want your names to be read, please bring them, and we'd be happy to read them at the proskomidie to pray for you. It's a blessing to have, and so it's a wonderful thing to do as well. Okay. Yes.
Question. The hot water, isn't it also symbolic of the water that came out of Christ's side when they...
Well, that prayer is read at the beginning when the wine and the water are placed in the beginning. When he says that the spear of the soldier, his side was pierced with the soldier's spear, and out came water and wine, or blood and water. So that's more towards the beginning of the service, is that symbolism. The question was, if you have 2,000 or 3,000 names, do you read all of them? You do your best as the priest. In modern day liturgies, we only have a short, really, amount of time. Even if you do the proskomidie during the Orthros, you only have about 20 or 30 minutes to read names. And it's impossible to read 3,000 names. There was a saint, though, I will say this. There was a saint in 20th century Greece. His name was Saint Nicholas Planas. And St. Nicholas Planas served liturgy every day for 50 years. Okay? And during his liturgies, he would commemorate, he always had with him the names that he was going to commemorate. He always kept them on him. They called them his contract. He called them his contracts. So he would keep these big stacks of names. And he would read every single name during the Orthodox service. It would take him hours to read every name. He would not finish liturgy until about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, mostly from the reading of names of those that he commemorated. So if we were to be perfect, we would read every name. We have to do, there is a practicality's sake as well that we have to be mindful of. So we read as many as we can. I always read every name that I have here because we don't have 2,000 names. I have a few, probably a few hundred names, so it's easy to read in a few minutes. And so we do our best. So that's my full answer to that question. Okay, now switching from the proskomidie service to the church architecture, which I feel is extremely important to our theology. It's really, if you think about it, the church architecture is the first impression that we have of any church that we walk into. When we go to a church that we're not members of or not familiar with, it's the first thing we notice is how the church looks from the outside, and then when we walk in from the inside, we look around to see, oh, do they have the same thing that my church has? Oh, do they have this? Oh, that's really nice. Oh, I don't. Usually we say, oh, I don't like that so much. Okay, so the first impression we have of the church is how it looks. So it's a very important part of our worship, and it's a very important part of our expression of our theology, especially of this concept of heaven on earth. So to start out, I wanted to tell a great story from our church history. In the 10th century, Prince Vladimir of Russia, Russia was still pagan at the time. It had not accepted any form of organized religion except for paganism. And during this time, Prince Vladimir was deciding what faith he wanted to follow. And he got offers basically from 4 groups, from the Jews, from the Muslims, from the Western Christians or the Catholics, and from the Orthodox. And so he sent people out to see each of these religions, to kind of see what they were all about. Like, okay, I don't know anything about these faiths, I'm going to send some people out so they can report back to me, and we can make a decision. So when they returned to Russia one by one, first the Jews came and reported that the Jews, for all the wonderful things of their faith, they had lost Jerusalem to the Muslims. And Prince Vladimir, being a very administratively minded king and prince, said, well, if they can't even hold their own jewel city, then God has clearly abandoned them. So we're not going to choose the Jews because God is not with them anymore. Then of the Muslims, the emissaries came back and said that there was no gladness. This is the true report of the emissaries. He said, there's no gladness among their people, only sorrow. And he said, also the Muslims do not permit eating pork or drinking alcohol. And to that Prince Vladimir said, drinking is the joy of the Russian people, and we cannot live without this pleasure. So Prince Vladimir said, we cannot become Muslim. It's not going to work out. Then the Catholic Church, the emissaries from that went to the Catholic churches in Germany they went to, came back and said there is no beauty in their churches. So this is interesting because now the shift comes to what were they looking for? They were looking for beauty in their churches and in their worship services. So they came back from the Catholics in Germany and said there's no beauty there. There's nothing beautiful about what they do. And finally, the emissaries from the Orthodox who had gone to Constantinople returned. And they were reported that they were amazed by what they saw. They had witnessed a divine liturgy in all of its fullness taking place in Hagia Sophia, in the great church of Hagia Sophia, back when it was still a church. And the emissaries said, we've never seen such beauty, and we know not how to tell of it. We no longer knew whether we were in heaven or on earth. So if you can flip to the next slide. These are pictures of modern day Hagia Sophia. A little bit tough to see. Let me turn the lights off. It might be a little bit easier. So this is modern day Hagia Sophia. Obviously you can see there are some Muslim additions that they've made. So a little background on Hagia Sophia. It was built in the 6th century by the Emperor Justinian. And it was a huge undertaking, but it only took them about 4 years to build, which is amazing, really, to think about the technology they had at that time. They built this amazing structure in 4 years, and that was including the dome collapsing 3 times. So it's really an amazing piece of architecture. It really transformed architecture across the world. And what the Emperor Justinian, who was a faithful Christian, was trying to portray through this church was the majesty of the liturgy, and really that when you go, like we were talking about, when you go into church, you're in heaven itself. I had the honor to go a couple of years ago to see Hagia Sophia, and while it is sad that it's not a church anymore, you can really understand the glory and the majesty not only of Byzantium, but really of the Orthodox worship services that we have. So what are some striking things about this church that we see? Just things that you see right off the top of your head. Yes. The light. Yeah, the light is a big thing. It was a big thing for the Christians at the time, for the Byzantines. What they were trying to do with the light, first of all, Christ teaches us that He is the light of the world. And so they wanted to bring in a lot of light. You can see all the windows. They say have windows everywhere. But most important for them was this ring of windows they had right at the base of the dome. They wanted to make the effect that when the sun was shining through, that the dome was floating. That the dome had no foundation in the church. That it was just kind of, it was there, like heaven itself. You know what I mean? It's not bound to anything on the earthly level, that it's just on its own in heaven by itself. So light was a big factor for the Byzantines. What else do you find striking about the structure? The size it's huge, yeah. It fits countless thousands of people. In the old days, there were 13 services a year where the entire city of Constantinople would have liturgy in Hagia Sophia. The entire city would come to Hagia Sophia to have liturgy with the patriarchs and the bishops and the priests. So, and there's also 2 levels here, so you can fit, obviously, thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It's a huge church. Very good. What else? Anything else? The gold, yes, very beautiful. They did not spare any expense in making Hagia Sophia, absolutely. What else? Anything else? Very tall, yes. Your eye is drawn upwards, okay, by the lines. The lines of the architecture draw your eyes upward, which gives you the effect of you're moving up towards heaven, okay? Moving up towards the dome in heaven. There's another interesting architectural development, which was a first of its kind. You notice that the dome is not supported by any direct beams downwards. The edge of the dome here, there's no beams coming straight down to the ground. This was the first time this had ever been done. And what they did was they built these things called pendentives. And they took the weight of the dome and placed it on the side walls instead of having to add extra beams to support it. And it gives the effect that the church has a weightlessness. That the dome, even though it's huge, the dome is over 100 feet wide, that it has no weight because it's just floating. It looks like it's just hanging there by a thread, which is why it caved in 2 times. You know, the third time they got it right, and it's been there for 1,500 years, but it caved in 2 times because the architecture was very difficult to perfect, especially at that time. So what makes Hagia Sophia, and really this was an inspiration for many, many Orthodox churches across the world. What makes it so impressive is that through the architecture, through the design, through the beauty that they put into this church, it expresses the theological truth that we've been discussing, that the church is heaven on earth. So I want to touch on a few things that we find in many Orthodox churches that teach us this point. If you can go to the next slide. Okay, the first basic point I want to talk about is the floor plan. Many times we don't think about this, but the shape of the church, of the worship space, is actually very important. Our church upstairs also follows this floor plan. The basic idea is that the shape of the worship space is a cross. That's the red here. It's a cross. Okay. In the center of the cross, this is the dome. Okay. So the dome is in the center of the cross. And this teaches us through the architecture that in order to reach the dome, which is heaven, it's the heaven itself, okay? In order to reach it, we must pass first through the cross. The circles, of course, are symbols of eternity. So in order for us to achieve eternity, we must first pass through the cross, the self-denial, the self-emptying that Christ went through in order to resurrect from the dead and to grant us eternal life. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, now the 2 other things I want to talk to about the vertical movement in churches and the horizontal, the west to east movement. So if we think about our churches, and again, many of these things we'll even find upstairs, especially in Panagias, there's a movement from the floor level up to the dome, which is from earth to heaven. So the floor level is earth, represents earth. On the floor, literally the floor, usually we have red carpet. If you look down at your feet right now, the carpet is red. Any idea why the carpet would be red in an Orthodox church? It's almost always red. I would say like 90% of Orthodox churches, if they have carpet, it's red on the floor. Say it again. Divinity, it's a good guess. Royalty, it's a beautiful color. Yes, what else? Blood, yeah, it is blood, yeah, the color of blood. The church is built on the blood of the martyrs. Okay? So on the base of the floor is the martyr's blood and Christ's blood himself. Okay? So it represents the earthly struggle that the martyrs had to endure. Remember we said pass through the cross to get to the eternity. The earthly cross that they had to endure, that they had to suffer through in order for us to build the church, okay, in order for the church to survive, and for us to be able to experience heaven here on earth. So we start out now on the bottom, and now we move our way up. Go ahead, Chris. We go to the dome. Okay. If you can go back one slide, actually. Another point I want to make is that on the bottom level we see many straight lines. The pews are straight lines. The columns here are straight lines. Even the iconostasis has a lot of straight lines. It's a mix. The iconostasis is a mix, and we'll get to that later. If you go to Panagias upstairs, you'll see on the bottom floor there's big columns, and it's many straight lines. What that does, what is a representation, is again, it's a representation of earth. Okay? The straight lines, it's like we're bound by the linear movements. Okay? We have some limitations, and it draws our eyes upward. Now, if we look at the upward part of the church, which is the dome, the straight lines are replaced by what? A lot of circles. A lot of circles. We have circle, 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 circles, many circles. Okay? So the straight lines are replaced by circles, and the dome then is the representation of heaven, which makes sense then that who is in the center of the dome? Christ himself. In most churches, the traditional icon to put in the center of the dome is Christ, the Pantocrator, the one who has all authority. Okay? So Christ is in the center of the dome because he is the one in heaven. He's looking down on us, and also he's blessing. Christ in the Pantocrator is always blessing. Because when we walk into a church, the church, of course, is our hospital. It heals us, and we are transformed. So through Christ's blessing, we are transformed. So now our eyes are drawn up to heaven, and we see the path that we have to travel. We have to go from earth to heaven. Now, if we go one more slide, we have this other portion of the church, which is the altar. If you notice, even in St. Catherine's Chapel down here, the altar is what? Is it on the floor level? It's not on the floor level. Is it at the dome level? No. It's elevated, but it's not all the way elevated. It's in between. So the altar then is the meeting point. It is the meeting point of heaven and earth. The earthly priests take their place, and they are met by the heavenly hierarch, which is Christ himself. The flesh and blood, the bread and the wine are transformed into the body and blood of Christ in the divine altar. So this altar, again, is the meeting point of heaven and earth. And so through the architecture of the church, even in the different levels that we have, the church is trying to show us that, hey, this is where it happens. This is where heaven and earth come together. This is where we can experience heaven ourselves. Okay, now the next movement I want to show is the west to east. Now in the Orthodox churches, the churches always face east, as long as you're able to do it. They face east for a few reasons. First of all, the Bible speaks about Christ returning and coming from the east. Okay? But another reason is that we call Christ the Son, S-U-N. We call him the Son, S-O-N. But he's also the Son, S-U-N, of righteousness, and he is the never-setting sun. And of course, the sun rises in the east. So the church faces the sun, the rising sun that never sets, who is Jesus Christ, which is why the church faces east. On the west end of the church, in almost every Orthodox church you'll enter, we have the narthex. And again, the narthex is a representation of earth. We come here and we still have our earthly anxieties, our earthly weights. We come to light our candles to pray for the things that we need, the people that we need to pray for, but we still have not entered the church proper. We still have not entered into heaven because we're still outside. In the ancient church, the catechumens, those who were studying to become Christians, would sit in the narthex. They would not come into the church. Nowadays, we don't make distinctions, but they would sit in the narthex, and they would actually not be allowed to stay through the entire service. So they would stay here because they had not entered into the fullness of the faith of being baptized. And so they could not experience that heaven yet because they were not ready for it. So the narthex is earth. Now as we move farther east, we can go to the next slide, we go to the nave. The nave is where we're standing right now, or sitting right now. It's where usually the pews are. An interesting note, the actual Orthodox tradition is not to have any pews. It's to have seats on the sides. Many times in Greece you'll see churches like that. And for people to stand through the whole service, and only if you get tired to go sit down. But in America we've adopted the more Western practices of having pews and chairs. That's a side note. So the nave, though, now we're moving from earth, we've moved into the church proper. And the nave comes from the Greek word naos, and it has the same root as the word navy. Navy meaning, what do we think of when we think of navy? Ocean, what else? Ships, good. Okay, so the church then, calling itself a naos, okay, a navy, is calling itself a ship, okay? The ship that holds us all and that carries us through the stormy life that we lead, okay, or the stormy world that we live in. And it's taking us then, it's carrying us through all of the difficulties that we have in this life, and it's carrying us to heaven itself. So when we think of the church, we have to think of the church as a ship. And on the next slide, there's an interesting icon I found of Christ and his saints and the Theotokos and many hierarchs. And they're in a ship. And it says on the ship, Holy Orthodox Church. Okay? So here's the church as a ship, and it's sailing away from all of the things that are attacking it. Okay? And the Antichrist is here. It's a very unique icon. I've only seen it in a few places, so I thought it was interesting just to illustrate this point of the ship, and the church being the ship that protects its members from all of the dangers that we have to face in this life. So going through then into the church, now we are in the ship, and it's carrying us to our final destination, which again is the holy altar, which is heaven itself, okay, which is the heaven, the representation of heaven, moving from west to east. So the altar being heaven, of course, is where the liturgy takes place. It is the presence of God in the church, is the Holy of Holies. In the ancient temple of Jerusalem, the Holy of Holies was the part of the temple where nobody could enter. Only the high priest would go in once a year to offer incense. But they could not go in because they believed that the presence of God was there. So it was blasphemous and disrespectful for a person to walk into the Holy of Holies. Now, God has made it much easier for us to access Him. So the priests and the altar servers are able to go into the altar to stand in the presence of God, and that presence of God is brought out to all the people. In the ancient temple, again, there was a separation. You couldn't even see the Holy of Holies. Now the doors are opened. Heaven has been opened to us so that we can walk, towards it and be enlightened by God and His divine light. Are there any questions then about the church architecture, about what we see in our church, how our churches are built, and how it expresses this reality of the heaven on earth? Many times I think we don't really consider it. We're used to our churches that we walk into. We say, we don't think about it too much. But everything that we do in our churches has symbolism. There's nothing that we do just because. That's easy. Everything we do is to make it beautiful and to show the truth that we are the fullness of the faith, that we are the true Christian faith, and that that the Orthodox Church and our churches is heaven itself. Are there any questions? One second. Hold on one second.
Just wanted to make sure I understand the direction.
Sure.
West to east and then south, right?
North to south is not really. That's more to make the representation of the cross, north to south. So and the cross is a representation again of. If we think about it, we have a horizontal line. This is the earth. It goes from east to west. It covers the entire earth. And then you have the vertical line of the cross being from earth to heaven. So through the cross, Christ encompasses all of humanity and also all of creation from earth up to heaven as well. Any other questions? Yes. 1 second.
Father, I've been in a church in Las Vegas
Yes.
that was built the very old way with 5 domes. Would you please refresh my memory what the 5 domes were for?
Christ is always the center dome. The big dome is always Christ, representing heaven itself. Usually when you see 4, we usually put them in right underneath our domes. Usually it's for the evangelists, the 4 evangelists. Now, I have never studied that particular architecture style with the 5 domes, but usually when we see 4, it's the evangelists. Also, I've seen domes that have the story of creation in them, that have story of revelation in them, and some old churches in Greece and in the old world that have those as well. So I'm not particularly sure what those domes are dedicated for in that particular church. There's not really any, I'm sure there are guidelines, but there's some freedom with that on what you are able to do or not to do. So,
Thank you.
no problem. Any other questions? Sorry, I'm keeping you guys a little bit long today. Yes, John.
When Christ was crucified, was he facing east?
You know, I read that, in my research, I read that one of the reasons why we face east is because Christ was crucified facing west. So that was like the side of darkness. That was the side of the evil. He was facing the evil face to face. And so the east is the side of the light. That's not something I found in seminary. That was something I found in my research for my topic today. I didn't share it because I could not confirm it with any patristic sources. But that is something I did find, and something that people will probably say is one of the reasons why we face the Eastern Church as well. Again, I didn't share it because I could not confirm it through any patristic texts or anything like that.
So it's not...
Nothing that I've found. We could do more research as well on that. That's another question. Yes.
This is a little off the topic of the architecture, but are you going to be talking about the items on the table soon,
very
too?
briefly on your way out, I'll have you guys come up and look at these things. I can run through really quickly.
Because I wanted to know that what is on top of the discari, what is that called?
Yes, I can explain really quickly those things because I want to get you guys out of here too. What we have, I brought a brochure so you could see one in person with a really good seal on it, so you can see all the different elements live in person. I have two gospel books to show the two different sides of the gospel. On the one side is the crucifixion. This is the side that we leave up during the week. And then on Sunday, we flip it over, and on the other side is an icon of the resurrection, because Sunday is always a celebration of the resurrection. So even in our gospel books, there's always symbolism. Nothing's ever plain. So I'll leave these up here to show. This actually is an interesting thing that probably most people don't get to see. This is called the Dimitrios. You'll see it when you come up here. The Dimitrios is it's placed on top of the altar table, and we perform the sacrament on here. For the practical purpose is it catches the crumbs that might fall from the discarion, but the theological purpose is it has the signature and the seal of the bishop on it. And so when the bishop is not present, it is a representation of his blessing that we can perform the liturgy anywhere that this Dimitrios is. So on this Dimitrios, there's an icon of the burial of Christ and the empty cross and the four evangelists with the mystical supper. So take a look at it. This is a very interesting piece. You probably won't get to see it very often, so take a quick look at that as well. Here is the chalice and the discarion. Now the discarion, again, is a representation of the church and of heaven. And on top of it is we call this the asterisk, the asterisco. And it is in the prayers, when we say it, we say the star, it's related to the star which goes over the cave in Bethlehem. Saint Germanos, who was a father in the 7th century, I believe, he wrote a patristic commentary on the liturgy, and he related many of the acts that we do during the liturgy to the birth and the life of Christ. So when this is placed, it's the star was over the cave in Bethlehem. So it represents the star in Bethlehem as well. And the practical purpose, there's always a practical and a symbolic. The practical is it keeps the coverings off of the host, off of the bread, so that the crumbs don't get everywhere and get stuck to it. So that's the practical purpose and the symbolic purpose as well. This is the yair. This goes over the gifts. It's the covering for the gifts. The priest picks it up during the creed and shakes it, representing. Again, practical purpose. In the old days of the church, they had a problem with bugs and flies. So when the priest shakes the thing, he's shaking, literally shooing the flies away from the gifts. We don't have to worry about that too much anymore, but in the old days it was a problem. This is a representation also of you can say, of the tomb being broken by Christ in the resurrection, by the Holy Spirit, the movement of the Holy Spirit shaking the aed as well. And then these are the coverings for the gifts. Again, they're used to cover to protect the gifts from anything that might fall or any, again, in the old days, any critters that might have tried to get into them. They covered them to protect them. The lance is here. The priest uses this to pierce the amno, just like the soldier pierced the side of Christ. And so we do that, and we make a lot of the cuts with the lance. We call it the spear. And then the spoon is here, which we use to give Holy Communion as well. So please, on your way out, please come take a look at all these wonderful things we have here. Oh, the censer is the only other thing. The censer, interestingly enough, is usually shaped like a church. You can see the top is kind of like a dome of a church. And then the incense rises out of it, representing our prayers, which go up to heaven and up to God. So these are all the liturgical items. Say it again?
Why do they have the bells?
The bells are a symbol of joy. Usually there's 12 representing the 12 apostles. Like we say the apostles, their voice has gone out into all the earth. So we make the noise just like the apostles received the good news and they went out and told everybody the good news of the resurrection of Christ to the whole world. So these are the symbolisms of the censer as well.
And another item on the left of the chalice? This is the
This one?
water.
Oh, this is the Zeon holder, yes. This is just the Zeon holder. There's not, it just carries the hot water from the hot water pitcher to the priest. And usually it matches the liturgical set to make a more glorified liturgy service. So yeah, I thought I'd bring it out because a lot of people don't get to see it if they're not in the altar. So. All right, if there's no other questions, I invite you guys to come up, take as much time as you want to inspect and see these lovely items that we have here.
Tine presvies ακίμη των Θεοτόκων και προστασίες αμετάθετων ελπίδαν τάφος και νεκρόσεις φου και κράτησεν ως γαρ ζωής μητέρα προς την ζωήν μετέστησεν ο μητρανικήσαν.